Hello, my name is Fred Pernay. I'm an Agile and Lead consultant, coach and trainer working at proAgile, it's my company. Today I'd like to talk to you about risk value prioritization. This is a technique I've developed over time and with many clients to help prioritize and schedule work, especially useful in Agile projects, because one of the things about Agile, of course, is incremental delivery. It's iterative and incremental, but the incremental part means you're delivering in chunks, in small chunks, hopefully. So the idea is to deliver those chunks by what you would call weighted shortest job first. In other words, the thing which is the most valuable and shortest, you would do that first. Now, in the public sector, this is quite tricky because value is a more difficult concept, because it's not like private sector where value essentially comes back to profit and loss, profitability. Whereas in public sector, it's not so easy. So this is a very useful technique I found when I'm working with the public sector to help them think about the value of what they're doing in terms of the projects and indeed increments within projects. So rather than go on and on about risk value, I'm going to take you through a case study to look at how I applied it with a private sector company, actually a petrochemical company, a very large one, not far from where I live. So let's take a look at risk value. So the case study is, as I said, a petrochemical company, and they had, the IT department I was working with had a problem. They had an old server which was hosting about 135 apps, which was serving about 1,000 people in the business and on the plant. And these apps varied in size and varied in business importance, and also varied in frequency of use, etc. So they approached me and said, well, how should we start migrating these apps? Because the plan was to migrate these apps off the old server onto a new server, which was fail-safe and very robust, whereas the old server, been running for about 4 years, could have died at any time. It was being backed up, but they would have lost a fair bit of data, because you imagine 1,000 people generate quite a bit of data over a week, which is kind of the backup process time. So they came to me and asked me, so how should we migrate these over? Now we looked at this in terms of risk value, and essentially when we looked at their current plan, we came across this profile of the plan. Essentially what we did is, for each of the apps, we did two things. Risk is probability times impact. So we looked at the impact of each of these apps on the business. In other words, if this app was taken away because the server died, then what would be the impact to the business? And we've worked out that the impact really was proportional to the number of users which would be impacted, and also the business criticality of that particular app as well. Now, the probability or the likelihood of it being a problem, if you like, was down to the frequency of use. Now, all this data was available on the server, so we pulled off that data, and we essentially did the calculation of impact times probability, which gave us the risk value of each of these apps. And when you add all that up and essentially turn that into a percentage, this was the profile for each of the apps which were scheduled over the 3-month period. So when I joined them, they'd already started. They were about 3 weeks into the migration, and we intervened here and essentially applied the risk value shortest job first approach, so that the profile certainly essentially changed to this. Now, this essentially all we did was we did a third piece of work, which was calculate the risk value, but then also calculate how long it takes to migrate the app itself. And we came up with 3 t-shirt sizes: small, medium and large. A small was a size 3, a medium was a size 5, and a large was a size 13, which sort of equated to the amount of hours as well, more or less, it would take to migrate the app. So we reordered these by weighted shortest job first. So essentially, the apps which were the highest value and easiest to do were done first, right the way down to the apps at the bottom end, which were low value and would take the longest to do at the other end. So you might say to me, well, so what? After 3 months, we would have migrated both approaches would have migrated all the apps. What's the difference? Well, if you were to imagine the risk in this project was that the server could die, 2, maybe the developer could get pulled onto another project, or the developer could get a better job offer somewhere else, or a number of other things could happen. Essentially, you might have to stop the project halfway through. So if you are halfway through this project and an n number of things could happen to you, if you took our approach using risk value, shortest job first, you would have burnt down 3/4 of the risk. In other words, 3/4 of the people in the company would be able to use the apps off the new server. So they would be happy. In other words, you would have got the majority of people off your back, if you like. However, if you continued on the original blue path, then almost the opposite applied. It's quite interesting when the figures came out. So nearly only about a quarter of the app value, if you like, the total app value, would have been migrated over. So you had a significant amount of risk still left in the project. Just by changing the order, it didn't make it any harder or easier. Well, it made it easier for the developer because he was doing the shortest stuff first. So there was no real skin off your nose. That calculation only took us about half a day to work it out. We had to consult with the business, but most of the data was available. It wasn't an onerous calculation to do. The other interesting reflection from the business was when they looked at this curve. They had a bit of an epiphany, and I thought, well, hang on, what about this stuff down here, the tail, the long tail, stuff which is adding very little value, stuff which people aren't using very frequently, and not very many people are using at all. So there might be one person using this app once a year. Were they still being used? So that prompted an investigation to look at whether some of these apps could be retired, and whether or not these were useful apps at all. So all in all, that's quite an interesting case study. So that's risk value. Hope you found that useful. My details are here if you wish to contact me. Be very pleased to talk to you. Thank you for listening.